In this section, I'll talking about UVing, how to assign space within the UV texture editor, and I was talking about sampling. Now, UV unwrapping is kind of the hardest part for students to sort of get around. If you stick with the workflow that I told you, model, go straight to UV unwrapping, it can be a easier experience or a more pleasant experience rather than trying to do too much UVing at one time. Once you UV unwrapped, it's important to not waste any of the space within the grid, this being the grid of course. Try to use as much of the space as you possibly can. Also, compare the UV shell to the amount of area space it has within the scene. So as you can see here, the sides of the barrel are quite large, so the UV shell should be quite large as well. The larger the UV shell is, the more detail you can have on that object. So smaller areas such as the top here don't need to be large at all. It has to be pretty small because no one's ever going to see that detail. The most important aspects of this model is the sides, and where to assign UV spacing is by having a checkered texture on your model so you can help see how much detail there'll be on that specific space. As you can see here, there's a checkered texture on this model. This is from the inbuilt function within the UV texture editor. This particular button here turns on and off the checkered texture. And usually if you have more squares on an area, then that will usually mean you'll have more detail within that area. So you can see here that this definitely has more detail compared to that, which is a mistake. This should definitely have more detail. It's important to keep an eye on how big or small you make your final texture sizes. Keep in mind how big the object will appear on screen and compared to your character. This can help determine how big or small the texture sizes should be by the end. This is known as sampling. Be careful not to oversample or undersample your textures. So as you can see here, I have these two walls here. They're quite large, they're literally double the size of the character. This particular, I'll just turn off viewpoint 2.0 so you can get a better look at it. This particular texture here is actually a 2048 by 2048 texture file. This one here is a 5 by 12 by 5 by 12, and you can really see the difference. You can see here this has higher details, much more higher res image, whereas if you look at the one next to it, you can definitely see that this is a very blurry image. This is very much undersampled. It's too small compared to the character. If this was in a game engine, this would look like a really murky texture, whereas this one here, very much high res, much more detail compared to this version. This one is definitely one you would go for. But bear in mind not to make your texture sizes too big because you'll be wasting file size. You have to try to find the sweet spot between the two.